Good afternoon. My name is Hayley Clements. I'm a researcher here at the Centre for Sustainability Transitions at Stellenbosch University. My research seeks to understand how we unlock just and resilient conservation systems in Southern Africa. And I am very fortunate today to be hosting a group, the Morally Contested Conservation Group, which is hosted by Oxford University. They've come to join us to seek collaboration and commonalities in the work that we do here and the work that they do with various exceptional researchers across the continent. Visiting us here today is Betty Rono. She is a PhD student at Rhodes University, and she does really interesting work around understanding nature's contributions to people. So she has kindly offered to share a little bit more about her work with us. And so to start, if you could just explain to us and people that may not know a little bit more about why it's important to understand nature's contributions to people, especially in today's volatile and rapidly changing world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hayley, for having us here, first of all, and thank you so much for hosting me. Nature's contribution to people is a concept within ecosystem services. So it is the same as ecosystem services, but now upgraded to include the negatives that comes from nature itself to people. And nature's contribution to people incorporates culture, as well as the negatives that come from nature, as I said before. And why it's important for us to understand this in the rapidly changing world right now is because it feeds directly into the Sustainable Development Goals. So if we have to do development, then we have to understand what does nature contribute to people and what do people understand what do they expect from nature itself. The other thing is that it incorporates culture itself. So there is a cultural interconnectedness between people's livelihoods and also the existence of nature itself as a resource itself. So that intertwined connectiveness is what is really important, because if we do development without understanding these things, we risk losing either the peoples with their culture, or we risk going over the tipping points with nature itself. The other thing is that it is important in policy and decision making, because then we understand both ends. As much as we conserve nature knowingly from science, incorporation of indigenous local knowledge and incorporation of culture within the decision-making processes make sure that our policies that we implement are actually making sense.
Yeah, thanks for helping us understand that a bit more. And as you say, I think it's so critical to articulate the ways in which nature contributes, and we all depend on it. That otherwise, if we don't appreciate that, we kind of strive on without the foundation of thriving societies.
Sure.
I wondered, when you're speaking about this framing of nature's contributions to people, about the opposite of that, the contributions that people give to nature. And the reason I bring it up is because I feel like in this kind of discourse around the ways in which we depend on nature, it's very much framed almost that we're impacting nature in ways that are negative, biodiversity loss, all of that, and that's going to have an effect on us as a result. And I wondered if this framing is also helping to raise the positive ways in which people contribute to nature, and if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because often there's a debate where people say the human has been detangled from nature. It's like an independent thing from nature, but no, we are part of nature. It is a front-back relation. So either way, human beings have an impact on nature itself. So we use the resources in nature. We modify nature itself. So the other side of the coin is when we are using nature, or when we are harvesting NCP. NCP is the nature's contribution to people. How do we also impact the environment? Do we propagate nature's modification on a positive side or a negative side? So either way, nature contributes to us, and we contribute to nature through modification. We're just like any other species in nature. So human beings are part and parcel of nature itself.
Yeah, and I think that is such a good alignment with some of the work that happens here at the CST as well, the centre. this, you know, we talk about social ecological systems, and the kind of foundation of that is that there is this intertwinedness between people and nature. As you say, these relationships go both ways, they're evolving, they depend on context, etc. So I think it's so important that we recognize that and understand it. And so it would be nice to hear a bit more about the context in which you work, both in terms of how how that context is relevant to better understanding these relationships and these contributions, and particularly I know you work with local people and Indigenous knowledge, which is really interesting. And also I'm aware from your work that it's coming back to the theme of morally contested conservation. It's quite a contested landscape that you work in.
True. We'll talk specifically on the kind of work that I do. So I work in the Mao forest. The Mao forest is one of the very few montane forests that are indigenous in Africa specifically. And it's interesting because there is so much interest. There is a political interest, there is a local community's interest who are not indigenous. Then we have the indigenous community that is forest dwelling, so they live inside the forest. Then we have the local communities that want to live around the forest. Then we have the political frontier that has an interest because of course of the resources. Then we have external interests, people, stakeholders that are far away, maybe not in Mao, not in Kenya, not in Africa. They also have an interest because of the climate change and carbon sequestration. So the resource itself is really, really hotly contested because of this vested interest. Everybody has an interest from left and center. But what is interesting and why NCP fits to study in Mao is this. What are these different interests? And how are these different interests driving the decisions we make on the use of the same resource? This is a common resource. So if you go back to the very old theory of the strategy of the commons, can that apply in Mao, given the different interests? So Mao forest itself, given the different communities, first of all, that reside there with different interests and how they use the resource, it stands a chance of either being overused or being underused. So when we are talking about economics of natural resources, if we lock out the communities that live around there, so they don't have any economic value for the forest. And then we also have the indigenous forests that have the intrinsic value or relational value that is attached to the forest. If we kick them out, do we risk breaking that communal bondage towards the natural resources? And then again, we have a conflict that people slash out the whole forest and they say, if I cannot use it, then nobody can use it. When it comes to working with indigenous, because I work with indigenous and local communities, and I try to understand how they think, what is their attitude, and how they perceive the use of these natural resources. And we look at all the knowledge influences. So we have the contemporary knowledge systems that are being taught in school that is new to them. There is a local knowledge that is actually borrowed from other tribes. And then there is the indigenous knowledge. So how are all these knowledge systems influencing the decisions when it comes to the use of the forest? But one of the most important thing when collaborating with local communities and indigenous people when dealing with nature's contribution to people is the fact that indigenous local knowledge contributes a lot of knowledge in understanding ecosystem services and nature's contribution, either on the negative or on the positive. And it helps science when you make decisions and say, these are the policies that exist, or these are the governance that you want to implement in this place. When we incorporate indigenous local knowledge, then we face little or less resistance when we go to implement governance systems that are there.
Right.
Secondly, local communities are the stewards. When it comes to the resources, they are the stewards. Their culture, they are spiritually attached to the forest. So if you want to know something within a resource, for example, what wildlife exists, where are the water resources, is the resources changing, either increasing or reducing, who do you ask? The person at the invented of the forest. Thirdly, the importance of collaborating with these communities there is the fact that we want to monitor impact. These decisions that we make in governance of these conservation hotspots, we want to monitor the impacts. For example, if we go applying for a grant and we say we want to do some work in Mao, how do we monitor the impact of our work? Or how do we monitor the impacts of the decisions that we make in country? Because we work with local communities so that they can give us a feedback. And the fourth point is the fact that these communities actually, their livelihood is dependent on the forest. So unless they are incorporated in the decisions that we make, we risk losing them, or they risk being isolated from the decision that we make in regards of the same resource. And lastly, it's the legal right. You can't do something and exclude people who are at the ground. So it is a legal right for them to be part and parcel of actually understanding how nature contributes to the immediate person on the resource before we go to the national level, the regional level, and even the global level.
Yeah. That's such a good point. And when we talk about these nature's contributions to people, the social, ecological intertwinedness, conservation, I think, so often is seen more as, well, we've got to take people out of nature and protect it. And, you know, this is such a good example of when that would be, like, inappropriate. And risk losing also a lot of that, as you say, Indigenous local knowledge that is really critical for conserving those systems.
That's very true.
I was just wondering for myself and for others that might be watching and sure, if you can just explain again how you perceive the difference between Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge.
This is a tough one. This is a walk on the ice, but there is a thin line between that difference. But how we define in my study, because we had to define this so that we don't lose the reader. Indigenous local knowledge has to come from Indigenous people themselves, and it has to go back to a long history, and it is unique to Indigenous people. Local knowledge could be, it is the knowledge that is common for us who are living here. So we have, for example, how far are you from the Mao forest?
I see.
And are you a local person? Are you a resident person? Are your practices common to other people, even though they are not from your tribe? Are your practices common to the person next to you? So that is local knowledge. We all know that that is a bird that comes with a bad omen. Even if you're from a different tribe and I'm from a different tribe, we are all accustomed to the practices around. But Indigenous knowledge is unique to specific people. It's unique to a certain group of people and goes back to a long time. So that's how we define in our study, so that we don't lose the reader and say there is an intertwine of these knowledges. Yeah, true.
Can you share a little bit more about did any of the findings from this work surprise you, or what were the really interesting take-home messages that emerged?
Yes, there were some striking things, and this is very interesting because when I got into this study, I was expecting to find almost the same results as other ecosystem service assessment, but some of the things that strike my some of the findings that caught my attention was the fact that there is a very gray area. When you're talking about the demands and the values for nature's contribution to people, they are not as straight as the way we are talking about ecosystem services. There is a big gray area where you cannot define what are the demands, what are the values. And even when we categorize the values and we say this is intrinsic value, this is what do you call this is an intrinsic value, this is an instrumental value, this is spiritual or cultural attachment to this. No, there's a gray area where things are intertwined. That is one of the striking things that I realized. It's not a black and white situation. There's a gray area that things are intertwined. Speaking of intertwinedness, there's a link that all these other resources are linked together. It's not how can I say this? How culture and traditions inform the use of resources. That is when you are looking about relational values. It's not isolated to a certain type of people. It is intertwined, whether it is a person outside or inside the Mao forest itself. And that's some of the things that I got, that there is a very big relation with someone who is very far away and someone who is within the resource itself. Those are some of the things you think, okay, because this is an Ogiek and this is a person from outside and this is maybe someone very far away, there could be a very big difference. No, their values are all intertwined.
Wow,
and the final thing that I wanted to mention is the fact that as we talk about nature's contribution to people, it brings out the resilience of people or the resilience of the system itself. When human beings strive to harvest nature's contribution to themselves, they are actually fostering the resilience of the system itself. And this is an example.
Right.
Cultural attachment to the forest ensures, for example, I'm using the community that I work with. Ogiek people are hunters and gatherers in nature. So when they conserve the forest because they want to make sure that there's a certain tree that is standing for us to make sure that we keep the honey, that ensures the sustainability of the forest. You see how things are just intertwined.
Yeah.
And that's the most interesting thing that I found in my
Yeah.
study. Yeah.
That is amazing, and it's nice because we also, as part of the group, we're discussing this morning this idea of like seeds of a good Anthropocene, or back to this rapidly changing world, and how we need examples of transitions to systems that are people contributing to nature, nature contributing to people, resilient, sustainable systems, and it sounds to me like some of the lessons you've learned are examples of what those seeds could be. Can you talk a little bit more about do you see opportunities for that work to feed into a bigger discussion around just transitions, and what do you see to be the big challenges around that?
Before I talk about the challenges, I'm going to talk about the opportunities.
Yeah.
Because nature's contribution to people brings out the link between culture and actually the knowledge of the systems itself and how people benefit from nature. The opportunity here is to ensure that Indigenous local knowledge stands. There are so many studies that have been done, and we see Indigenous local knowledge being washed down because the knowledge bearers are dying off very fast, and they don't have a channel to transfer the same knowledge. But when we incorporate NCP into decision making and policy, we ensure that Indigenous local knowledge is recorded, it is put into consideration, and it is put into use when making decisions. That is one of the biggest opportunity. The other thing is that to foster cultural growth among all these communities that we work with. If nature's contribution to people incorporates the relational values, and we amplify the relational values of nature's contribution to people, we are fostering cultures of people, whether they are local people, whether they are people outside that have values for a certain resource, then we are fostering cultures.
Right.
But on the other flip, the challenges that I see is the lack of awareness. People do not understand ecosystem services. People do not understand nature's contribution to people. And the most important part is the question you asked me, how much do we know about people's contribution to nature, so that we can have a whole link of how things work. So one of the biggest challenges is lack of knowledge and understanding. The other thing is we lack finances or resources, funding and resources to do all this research. We need a lot of funding and resources for us to foster nature's contribution to people, especially in the African context, because we have hotspots that are actually on the tipping point, literally on the tipping point. We need information on that so that we can actually make the right decisions to save these systems. The other challenge that I also understand is the fact that there is the notion that we attempted to disconnect humans from nature. In my opinion, I think that is a red flag. When people feel disconnected to nature, people may not feel like it is my responsibility. We feel it is the responsibility of someone else, which is actually wrong.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point about also we focus on ecosystem services a lot, and nature's contributions to people take us much deeper into understanding these interactions, the cultural aspect, the various dimensions of value. But it is much, as you say, much harder to, you need resources to go and understand that in all these unique cases, as you've done in Mao. So I think as you say, a good opportunity, and especially in these at-risk systems that are really on the tipping point, as to use that as a tool to understand how we do conservation in ways that are more just and equitable, and that don't break those connections that we should actually be reinforcing.
That's the point.
Yeah. I finally wondered, you and many of the others that we unfortunately aren't interviewing today, but from the same morally contested conservation group, these amazing young researchers from across the African continent. And do you have any thoughts on, what young researchers can contribute to unlocking these just transitions, and maybe advice for other young researchers from across Africa that might watch this?
First of all, thank you for calling me young. It makes me feel fresh. But this is the point. Young people are energetic. they have the time, they are agile. And I think they are a resource we have not made use of them, especially in research when it comes to conservation. But the good thing is that they are sensitive and they are cautious about the environment. And I would like to call on young people to foster actually the use of technology, which is really something very important. Use of technology in understanding nature's contribution to people, documenting all this traditional knowledge and systems, sharing knowledge, ensuring that they are the people, the young people have the capacity through harnessing technology to actually bring in the dream that the globe is a village. They can actually shrink everything and we can share information. You can imagine how we can harness technology to see what is happening in Europe, what is happening in Australia, what's happening in Africa. And we combine this and we borrow each other, the knowledge we borrow each other, and we make sure that nature is conserved in the right way. The other thing is that they should be actually through conversations they can influence policies. Through documentation, through doing research, they can influence policies, and advocacy. That's very important for them. Through availing themselves to be at these high-end level meetings, if they have a chance, to just be there and put up their voice, to amplify their voice and say, you know what, the generation that is coming up, we also need to find these things, and our children to find these things, and our children's children to find these things. This is our voice, and this is what we stand for. I think if they avail themselves, they can amplify their voices. Finally, they can actually engage in communication and conversation, not only with top down or bottom up or the other way around, but they can also they can also have conversations within themselves.
Right. Yeah.
It's not only that all the young people or all the old people have certain knowledge uniformly. No, they can influence the horizontally. Have conversations with other people, because tomorrow they are the decision makers, right? So if you have knowledge as a young person, share with another, share with another, share with another. When it's time for us to make a decision, we make informed decisions.
It reminds me of some advice that I got when I went to my first international conference as like a young, master's student, I think, utterly terrified. You made a list of all the important people that are there that you must speak to, and someone said to me, don't just look up, look around.
That's the point.
Your peers are the leaders of the future. And so I really resonate with that point. And I think I also really like the idea of this global village. And I guess that's a small way what we're hoping to do with this conversation today, bringing together the morally contested conservation group with the students and researchers at the center here, is to start those conversations. And I think such a good call to action for all the researchers across the continent and the world to join that conversation. So it's been such a privilege to chat to you today, Betty. So that's Betty Rono from Rhodes University, speaking to us about nature's contributions to people. Thanks very much.
Thank you.